Let's go ahead and get things started, Leanne.
All righty, you got it. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our Tiny Talks workshop and tonight's Tiny Home Village Development section with Scott and Robin. And before we get started, I just want to remind you guys you're being recorded and make sure that is okay with you. And then also, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat. I'm happy to ask them for you, or you can save them till the end if it's something, it's not pertaining to what he's specifically talking about. So with that, I will turn it over to Robin and he will take over from there. You guys, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Welcome. I think a great thing would be to send out an email to all of our manufacturers to say, hey guys, you can get on the Tiny Talks and you can still work. Just turn it on your shop, or wherever you are, and just keep on going, listen in the background. Yeah, I see David's doing some electrical work and Andy's doing something there on his table. So yeah, it's all, I think it's all good. So that's probably something we should send out, and more people would do that. I think it's a great idea. Put on some earphones if you're going to be using saws and everything, and mute, and you'll be just fine. But with that said, so that's kind of, we still got a few more of these to do. So maybe we should send that out, Leanne, and just make a suggestion. Also, the things that we say and do here, guys, may or may not be the opinions of NOAA or NOAA's staff. We have guests on. We've had 48 or 49 of them so far. And, sometimes they'll say something that may or may not agree with what we do. So just wanted to put out that disclaimer. And before we go ahead and get started into this, well, we are nearing the end. We've got a few more days in order to get a total package for developments. And today we're going to do kind of the horizontal and the vertical construction. And then we have maybe one or two more after that, depending. Certainly, we want to have the exit strategy and how you get out of the unit. And we might have one more after that. So that's kind of where we are, guys. So let's go ahead and get started. Scott, say hi to everybody. And how's Scott doing these days?
Scott is incredible. I moved into an office, and I got an assistant, and we're getting ready to rock and roll and have an incredible year. I'm going to share my screen real quick, just so y'all can see this. Can you see that? Let's see if I can make it bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see that?
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
There it is.
So that's the front page of the Orlando Sentinel today. The article is pretty good. I'll copy the article later and send it on over to Leanne so she can post it. But I thought that you all would like that, because that's incredible.
That's awesome. Good news.
I'm not sure how to unshare my screen.
It'll say stop share, I think, at the top or somewhere.
Give me a second here. Now I'm losing the whole thing here.
Yeah, Jordan had to jump in last time and yesterday and help stop share. I find mine at the very top, but you might have to scroll down or scroll up to find it.
Get me back here. Hang on one second. Oh, here we go.
There we go. Good job. Did you do that, Jordan, or did you do it, Scott? Did you figure it out?
You still see my screen?
No, it's gone.
I did it.
I lost my video.
All right. You're on. You're looking good, Scott. We're on top of it here.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you. Yes.
Okay, I hear you. Okay, you're not seeing my screen anymore, are you?
No. I'm going to go ahead and share mine.
Okay.
Get the PowerPoint up here, and And we can go ahead and get this thing. Slideshow. All right. So anyway, today we're going to talk about the horizontal and vertical construction. By now, by this point, you should have all your permits, your building and your zoning and roads and water and sewer and all your permits in place. You may or may not have to pay impact fees. Sometimes impact fees you can wait until the CO, but your tap fees come somewhere along the lines there. Your state health department's either giving you a well and a septic or a water and sewer hookup. That's where the tap fees will come in. So that's kind of where we are right now. And so the next thing that we need to move into is what we call the horizontal construction, which is your everything except the vertical, I guess you could say that. So with that, Scott, what's the beginning? When we talk about site work, what are we talking about in the site work that we're going to do on the lot? I mean, we've got a lot there. It's got some trees on it. It's got some wetlands. What do we do from that point on?
So you're going to go ahead and hire a site contractor. Your civil engineer will have prepared a full set of plans, and that would have been permitted. And then typically we try to select our contractor a couple months before we get the full permits. So because once we're in pretty much for permitting, if you will, and that we've gotten the first set of comments back from the local municipality or county or whatever, then we'll usually go ahead and meet with the site contractors and try to figure out, maybe shortlist 1 or 2 or possibly 3 contractors, and then work with them to see if we can get to a price that we can live with, and that, what they call a scope of services. So we want to make sure that they're coordinating everything. We like to use typically one site contractor for all of it, but there are cases what we call boutiquing. So sometimes, like our first deal is only 2 acres, 2.5 acres. We may boutique that, where I'll hire somebody to come in and clear the site and do a rough grade. And then from there, we'd have somebody come in and do the infrastructure, the actual pipe laying and stormwater management, et cetera. So sometimes we'll do that in order to save costs, because we would not have the GC markup on the clearing. So it would depend on the scope of the services and the overall bid number, whether or not we would boutique any of it or do it ourselves. The nice thing about having one contractor do it is you only have to point one finger if there's a problem. And, because if not, let's say I do the clearing, then the site guy comes in and says, well, it's going to cost me 20 grand to fix what your guy did.
Right.
So
right. I've seen that before. And then when we talk about erosion control here, are we talking about silt fencing, or is there anything else that goes into erosion control?
Everybody has a little different design on the silt fencing. Sometimes you have to put the hay bales down, and sometimes you don't. And then if you're next to a wetland, you usually have to get into the next level up from silt fencing, which is that yellow fencing, to keep anything from going into the wetlands.
Yeah.
So,
and I've also seen where, if they're going to save some of the trees on the lot, where they take and fence around the trees before the equipment gets in there, so that they don't, I guess, get close to the trees and disturb the root system if they're going to try to save that tree.
Right. Most of the time, they're going to go a minimum of 3/4 of the span of the tree. So if the tree is this big around, you're going to figure out 3/4 of that wingspan, if you will, for the branches is about where you're going to have the minimum of where you're going to put the fencing. We saved a big, huge oak tree, and the site contractor was an affiliated company, and we had a heck of a time keeping their people out of it. We ended up putting a fence around it so that they couldn't drive underneath it, because they were bound and determined to get rid of that tree.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that. You know, temporary fences, you know, they just drive right over. You know, it's like, oh, you got that area flagged? Oh, so yeah, I hear what you're saying.
So
So,
also, we have a thing called the NFP. I can never remember the initials, but there's a whole plan sheet devoted to erosion control here in Florida.
yeah, and I guess these are some of the items that you would be looking at on your horizontal infrastructure, correct?
Yeah, one of the things you have to remember is the electric company usually comes in toward the very end. And if you don't time it and coordinate it well enough, they're going to come in and cut up your road to lay their pipe. So one of the things that we always stress having before we do the construction, if we have any interior roads or any parking lot crossings or whatever, we make sure that there's what they call sleeving, which is empty pipe that goes through, so that when they come to run their electric lines, and we'll usually go sit and work with the electric company prior to the construction once we have the plans done. I think it's critically important, especially in larger projects, because they'll want to put the big green box right where your entry is, because it's the easiest place for them to put it. And then you're doing, let's say, a 45-degree angle wall, and it ends up being behind the big green box. And it looks really stupid that the green box is in front of your sign for your Woodland Cove subdivision. So,
right.
And the other thing is you have to consider the cost, what that cost is, and make sure you include it in your budget. I did a huge project where I was a development consultant to a guy. And I said, what are you doing about the electric? He said, oh, we don't have to do anything with that. Progress Energy, which is now Duke, Progress Energy will just do that. I said, well, they're not going to just do that. They're going to charge us. Plus, we got to figure out where all the boxes are. And he said, no, he said, they're going to go ahead and do it. So I called Progress, and I went over and I sat with an engineer for 4 straight days. It was $768,000, and we located every single green box and connection point, which included some underneath sidewalks where sometimes you'll see in the sidewalk where there's like a green box that could be lifted almost like an electrical, like a connector box.
Yeah.
Every 500 feet, they have to have a connector. So we put a lot of that in the sidewalk, underneath the sidewalk, and then you'd have the green box in the sidewalk, and it was easy for everybody to get to. Everybody knew where it was. And all the big green boxes we put by wetlands and areas that were out of the way, that they wouldn't interrupt views or whatever. So
yeah, the green boxes are transformers, right? For the electric, and then you have connection points and different things along the way there. Tell us then, what would be your order of things to do? Obviously you got to clear the land. Who do you get in first and who do you get in last? Tell us kind of thumbnail, not all the time it works this way, but who do you use on when you're doing a project that you need? And this is when you're boutiquing. You're not, I guess, if you're hiring one contractor and he pays everything, then he does it all, the sidewalks, the roads, and, curb and gutter, and, all of that. But
right.
kind of whether he does it or whether you do it, kind of what is the first and what is the last thing to do?
Okay, the first thing to do is clear the site. The last thing to do is get your CO. So they will issue a subdivision horizontal CO, certificate of occupancy. Depending on what we're doing, our general schedule, we want to get the stabilized roadway, or in our case, the parking area, because it's external, but we want to get that stabilized and the water available as soon as possible. Because in Florida, most government jurisdictions, if we can get that done, we can then go vertical.
So you stabilize the parking and you do the water. That's the that's not the stormwater. That's not the sewer septic. That's the supply water line.
That's correct. You have to have your fire hydrants there so the fire department can come in
Okay.
if there's an issue. And that's why you have to have the stabilized road so they can get the fire trucks in there.
Okay, and so now you can start your vertical at that point.
Yeah, which is kind of neat because in our case we're doing tiny homes on slabs. If you're not doing them on slabs, your thing may be a little bit different because you're going to be bringing the homes in. Let's say you're doing tiny homes on wheels, you're going to bring those in and then anchor them down. So whatever kind of pad system that you're going to employ, let's say if like in an RV site, a lot of the RV spaces have concrete pads and then they have a little side pad for the casita, which is the little extra building that they'll put there many times, or where a secondary pad where you can park your cars, etc. So depending on what you're doing, it'll predicate, and then we have what they call a pre-construction conference. Once you've selected your contractor and you're about at permit, most municipalities, counties, etc., will allow what they call a pre-construction conference, which it's kind of like your pre-app conference at the beginning when you're going for your zoning, etc., is you go in and you bring in your contractor, usually the civil engineer, and everybody sits down with the building department and goes through what they're expecting. And then you'll have a schedule done with an order of what's going to happen when, assuming that everything goes according to.
How about the depending upon what you're going to do, sometimes you have a retention pond, and sometimes you have those the things that go underneath of the ground for your water retention. What is that called? I call them infiltrators.
Either outfall structures or just stormwater structures. So typically when you're doing your rough grading, you're going to grade your ponds and do any dewatering that you need to if you have a high water table. So dewatering typically gets sort of expensive, but because you need to be able to dig out the hole. We use retention ponds for several things. Number one is providing fill dirt to fill a lot of the site. And usually water management will let you go down 12 or 14 feet. And we've been known to over excavate. If we have really good quality soils down there and we need a lot of dirt, we'll excavate to 18 or 20 feet, which may require you to do a ledge in order to get the machines down to get the extra 10 feet. But we'll go down there and then we'll put bad fill back in the hole and then put a couple of feet of good fill on top of it so that the lake bottom is not murky and muddy. So the stormwater usually gets done pretty early. And then as you're sculpting your roads, let's say you're doing a normal subdivision, you're sculpting your roads, etc., you're going to go ahead and locate the structures because the structures are going to go in when the curbing goes in for your roads. So you have your road base, then you'll have your curbing that goes on top of the base. In typical here in 28-foot road or 24-foot wide roads that we have, a lot of our public roads here are 24 feet wide. There's a 28-foot sub base needed because you're going to have your Miami curb, which is that kind of rounded curve, is 2 feet. So you got 2 feet on either side, which gives you 24 feet of pavement in between. But your base underneath the curbing has to go out 24 plus 2 on each side to 28 feet.
And then you may have to have some additional right of way for your sidewalks and things that you're going to be putting in there too.
Well, that usually is covered in the 50 feet. Here we have 50 feet in most instances with what they call a closed drainage system, which means you're having the water go on your roads into a drainage structure, and then it's going to pop off and go through a pipe over to a pond.
Okay.
If that makes sense. If you're doing, let's say you're more rural and you have the extra land, here we can go to 60 feet of right of way and then do swale drainage. So the roads will drain into swales. And then from the swales at a certain point, it might pop off to a retention pond. But you can't do swales in 50 feet. You have to have a minimum of 60 feet to do swales here in Florida.
And then you have your cable and your internet cables and your whatever you're putting in there, fiber optics, anything like that would have to be installed before you actually get in there. And you either have to have your conduit for it to run underneath of your roads and stuff, or you either have to have that installed before you get into going ahead and finishing up your project.
It's a huge mistake to not put the conduit, or we call them chases, C-H-A-S-E, to not put your chases in prior, because it's just empty pipe, and you may be using 2, 3, 4-inch pipe, whatever, depending on the size of what's going in there. And it's really easy, for your roads, like call it 30 feet, because you're going to go a couple feet outside or 34 feet. You can put that pipe in, put an L on it, and then run it up so that it's sticking out of the ground so everybody knows where it is.
Yeah, and that pipe is cheap. 4-inch pipe or whatever you're using, PVC. Well, it used to be cheap. It's a little more expensive now, but it's still relatively cheap. So if you think you might need to go underneath of a road for anything, it's probably worthwhile to go ahead and put some of those in, even for future use if you need to.
The other thing that we use chases for is irrigation, and then let's say lighting for the entrance.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure there's chases at the entrance so you can put lights out there if you want, and then running your irrigation lines. A lot of people forget about the irrigation. So you've got an entrance, let's say each feature on either side of your entry, and then it's a bear to try to figure that out, and you don't want to have to cut the road, because then it just never looks right, and you'll
never
see
does.
That, and they could never match it, and then there's always the thing there.
Yeah, you got to have everything ready to put your asphalt down.
Final coat.
Yeah, so we have when we're talking on roads, obviously we're talking about the entrance off of the main highway. What other stuff are we looking at when we're talking roads?
Well, you may have to have a road right-of-way permit. So if you're on, let's say, a state road, you may need a DOT, Department of Transportation permit. If your project is larger, you may need a turn lane. So let's say you're going east on the road and you're going to take the right-hand turn into the project. You may have what they call a deceleration lane. And then when the people come out of the project and turn right headed east again, there may be an acceleration lane, and you've all seen those. And then sometimes you have to balloon out the road so that people coming westbound can have a turn lane to go into the project. And then when people pull out of the project to go west, they have an area where they can, safely sit to merge into traffic. And all that depends on, how many units and what you're doing, and who has jurisdiction over the road and how busy the road is.
Right.
That would be
right.
one
How
of
about
your permit items.
How about your roads inside? You might have permeable or impermeable roads in there for your parking and for your roads. Talk a little bit about that and reasons for each one.
Okay, your typical road pavement is non-pervious, which means the water runs off of it. It doesn't collect into it. What we're going to be doing in our project on the parking areas is using a pervious surface. It's a little bit more expensive, but the water filters through it. And so we can use part of that as part of our retention. We want to maximum, when we're doing small projects, 20, 30, 40, 50 units, we want to maximize the space that we can put the units, largely due to land costs. So we have pretty high land costs here. So we want to see if we can maximize our density. We're at about 10 units per acre on our stuff. So if I can save some land area by having pervious surface paving, it's a little bit more expensive, but sometimes it works because it saves me on land. Also, that we do that a lot with walkways too. Your interior walkways that are some of your sidewalks. Most people don't do that. That's called a low impact development item. And because it is more expensive. So it depends on the volume that you're doing and whether or not you need it for retention, or if you're trying to provide low impact development criteria.
Right. And then obviously, right away for utilities, either to get into the space or to cross over. Sometimes there might be some right of ways on the property itself that you need to pay attention to. And you can't do certain things in those right of way areas.
Utility line running is generally in what they call easements, EASEMENTS, easements. So you may have back from your first 10 feet of your property, let's say across the property front, your lot frontage will be a utility easement, and in there they're going to run all the utilities. One thing you have to be careful of is that most of the time they don't want your water and your sanitary to run on the same side of the road. So they're going to be on opposite sides. So you're going to need to make sure that you're providing adequate crossings, but your civil engineer should handle that.
Cool. All right. And then on the,
hang on one second. Let me add a couple things if you go back there. Some of the things everybody forgets is you got street signs. If you have interior streets, you're going to have street signs. You're going to have street lighting. Most likely you're going to have what they call hardscape, which is landscaping in the right-of-way areas. If you have a divided road, you may have trees in the middle. So you need to provide stop signs. Then your sidewalks, for example, need to have handicap ramps. And if you have a corner, then your sidewalk's going to have a ramp going to one road and a ramp going to the other road. And then you have to put the little round circles in the stamp. They have a stamp on the concrete that they do that stamp for the blind assistance. And then you're going to have to paint those different colors. So there's some costs there. And then you have your cross striping, where you have crosswalks where you're going from one sidewalk to another. You may have crosswalk striping. If you have an amenity area, you may have parking for your amenity area. If you do that, you're going to need to provide handicap parking places, which are oversized and have probably, you've all seen those with the blue striping. So there's some other considerations that you're going to need to put into your budget for those extras. And then if you want to do like designer stuff, usually the power company will have 2 or 3 different poles you can do. But if you're doing fancier, more upscale, you may do designer lighting. And when you do that, you need to provide chases, and then you would provide those materials yourself, and then you'd be required to maintain them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's good. That's a good point. And on the on this one, this slide just kind of talks about, we've already talked about wetland management a little bit, but if you want to talk about the some of those other items here that we might be considering when we're doing our horizontal construction.
In Florida, we have anywhere from 25 to 75 feet of a wetland buffer, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. And it used to be the old days, we'd do the sawtooth survey lines. And now what we're doing is pretty much straight lines from point A to point B. Instead of doing the sawtooth, we'll do that and then do an average. We try to do an average buffer line. So sometimes it may be a little bit less, sometimes it's a little bit more, but that saves you a huge amount of money on your survey, which is kind of interesting. Most places now, especially if you're doing a PUD that we talked about, planned unit development, or PD, planned development, which is the way we get around a lot of the zoning regulations by doing this PD or PUD, then most of them are going to have parks, recreation, and green space requirements. A lot of them are 35% of the site has to be maintained as open space. So you can accomplish open space by, walkways. We're accomplishing it by putting all the houses around a big central core amenity area, and then using the buffers that we have separating us from the other properties and landscaping those, et cetera. And that'll all be considered to be green space. If you're doing a kid-friendly
So you have
You're doing
buffers
kid-
between maybe the neighboring properties, in addition, and maybe a road buffer if you have a noisy road. It might be some commercial abutting one side of your development. You might want to put a buffer there just because of that. So those are some other
In-
reasons for buffers.
In almost every PUD that I've ever seen or PD that I've seen, there's a requirement of buffering around, I'm assuming you got 3 sides of your property abut somebody else and the 4 sides on a road. And depending on the strength of the road, like our first project that we were going to do on US 17, we had a minimum of a 50-foot buffer from that road. Because if somebody ran off the road, they don't want you running into the houses. What they're doing in a lot of instances now is putting that, like in commercial properties, you're putting your commercial buildings within 10 or 20 feet of the road, which is really kind of interesting.
And then sometimes you'll see a big mound of dirt, right at the road area, they pile up and landscape it and everything. And that might be able that not only just cut down on the noise from the road, but if somebody ran off the road, they would be running into a mound that runs across the front of the property.
We call that berms, BERM, berming,
yeah.
BERMING. And when you're doing berming, you need to be a little bit careful that you don't create too high of a slope, that they have to cut it to maintain it with a weed eater. So you want to make sure that you have the slope that's manageable from a riding mower.
Good point. You want it tall, but you don't want it too steep. You want it high enough to make it work, but you don't want it too steep.
The other thing that works really well is to go ahead and do a small berm with a hedge type bushes that go on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they grow in very quickly and they grow in very thick, and they can grow up to 3, 4, 5, 6 feet. So let's say you did a 2 or 3 foot berm and then you had this bush on top. In a couple of years, you're going to have a 5 foot, you'll have an 8 foot barrier, if you will, between the road and the property.
Road, yeah. And then there's also, I've seen some where there was still dirt roads, they weren't paved, and they put this berm up with the landscaping on it to keep the dust from the traffic from going into the site. So I've seen that happen before too. And you already talked about some of these. I think we're good with this slide.
Yeah, except for maybe extending the water or sewer lines. This is something that would come out in the initial phase before you really even got going. One of the things that we talked about in your pre-app is the city or county will tell you where the water and sewer lines are and whether or not it's economically feasible to extend them. Part of the thing on extending, if you're on a really busy road, let's say, and you have to extend and you got 1 million driveways, you're going to have to repair all those driveways that you tear up to put the water or sewer line in. So it's a cost consideration that you need to think about.
Yeah, and then when you're extending across all those people's properties, now they can tap into the water and sewer should they want to or be forced to, that you got to pay for. All right, what if you're going to be putting in some kind of an entrance or a sales? Do we have to be concerned about that?
The entrance is usually handled by our landscape architect. We'll have some kind of an idea of what we want and a kind of a cost. And the landscape architects are usually really, really good about working within budgets of, what are you doing? Are you doing a wall? Are you doing a small wall? Are you doing a split rail fence with some plants in front of it? And are you doing a center median cut where the going into the project, you're between the median and the right curb, or you're coming out, you're between the median and the exit curb? And are you going to put the signage in there? I was a big fan of sandblasted signs because they're extremely easy to maintain and nobody comes and steals the letters.
What is a sandblasted sign?
So if I'm doing, let's say, a kind of like a stucco type finish, they'll they can cover it up, and they have this material that they put over the sign face, if you will, and then they do a cutout. Let's say it's Woodland Cove with Woodland on the words on the top and Cove on the bottom, and they'll go ahead and put that pattern down, and then they take a sandblasting machine and they sandblast it, and it cuts out the stucco material. And then so I can paint the Woodland Cove, and I can paint the outside of it a different color and the letters for Woodland Cove a different thing. And then it's easy to maintain because an idiot with a sponge brush can fill in the depressed part that says Woodland Cove.
Right. And then sometimes on the entrance, you might have a gate or a guardhouse, depending on your project, where you go in and punch in some numbers and it opens up a little gate.
The temporary sales and leasing office would be something that you might put in as let's say a detached trailer is typically what we see. The considerations there are signage, number one, parking. What are they going to require for your parking for that? And then you're going to have most likely a ramp that's going to go up, so that a handicap ramp in order for people with walkers and wheelchairs that can get up into the sales office. So there's extra considerations that you need to put in your budget.
So if you have a model home, obviously you can make that. If you have a home up, you can make that close to the entrance and have that your sales. But if you're not, and you're still going to be doing site work and you want to get a head start on sales, I guess that's why they put in the temporary sales and leasing office to, people see things, dirt moving, and they're wondering what's going on there. They can go into the sales office and see what's happening and maybe put a deposit down on the lots or the houses.
That's correct.
All right. So anyway, when you're doing units, when you're constructing a tiny house community, and this is kind of different than normally when you do site construction, because people usually can't bring in their homes. But with tiny homes on wheels, obviously the homes could be brought in. So you could, in fact, put in a RV style hookups and landscaping and do all the horizontal work. And then with a tiny house, they could possibly bring in their home and tie it down or not tie it down, depending on whether it's a temporary RV park that you're building or whether it's actually to be lived in full time. And then the other option would be, to build the units, and are the units going to be on wheels, foundations? And if they're on foundations, they could be on a temporary or a permanent foundation. That's one of the things that Colorado is talking about, is developing these temporary foundations that you can take the home and then pull out the foundation and then take everything away and there's nothing left there. Is there any more about the two possible options, or have I gotten all the options that there are possible out there, Scott?
I think there's potential other options, which is to almost condominiumize tiny homes where you're stacking them. I know the company Boxable, I think that we mentioned in one of the first two meetings, is they have a home that folds out. And that's kind of an interesting thing. It's boxabl.com in case anybody's interested. boxabl, Boxable. And they're talking about doing stacked units. So, that's an outside possibility. The other thing is, just in terms of the leasing or selling or whatever, there's a lot of people that are looking to do Airbnb units. So, and then there's also container homes that can either be, on foundations or on some kind of piling type structure. So I think those are the only other options.
And there was one company at a show in Texas, and they were had designs for in the city area of these. It was like, how can I describe it? It was like a tree. They had a tree, and you'd have 4 stories high, and they go in with a forklift style thing and take the house down and move it to another city. But it was stacked up, and you basically unplug the utilities, and then the forklift would come up and move your house out. And it was a really neat design. I don't know if it ever got off the ground, but there's some free thinkers out there trying to come up with some things for these movable houses and tiny houses. So you have a lot of options possible there. So I put on here after the infrastructure, but according to Scott, you want to get, if you can, you want to get your vertical construction started before the infrastructure is complete. So as soon as you have your road base and your water in there so that you can put your fire hydrants in, you can go ahead and get started on vertical construction so you can get ahead of the game. But in the vertical construction, there's more than just the houses. There might be some other buildings. You want to address that, Scott?
Yeah, so in our first project and in all our projects, we're going to have a small clubhouse, and we will have laundry facilities inside the clubhouse for the particular reason that somebody, call it 3x3 for your washer dryer, even if it's a stacked unit, excuse me, is that's 9 square feet out of a 400 square foot house. So you may not want to do that. We're also pledging that all the money that is generated from the coin machines that'll be in the clubhouse will go back to the helping the monthly maintenance charges. You'd have to get to a larger project to get to a pool and a pool house. Once you start doing a pool for multiple units, you get into what they call a commercial pool application, and the costs go up significantly. When I was doing apartments a long time ago, we did the smallest possible pool that we could, then put a halfway decent deck around it, put barbecue grills, some hammocks, and some other amenities around it to minimize the pool size. Maintenance shed, if you have a larger project and you're doing any of your own maintenance, many times that maintenance is a little side to a clubhouse. You may have a clubhouse that faces into your project or whatever. You get a little side building that's got a small garage door on it, so they can keep weed eaters and edgers and lawnmowers and other maintenance equipment in there. And then whether or not you get into garages and/or personal storage, there's different things you can do there. A lot of the apartment guys right now are building detached garages, and they're renting those garages and getting pretty good numbers for those. You also may want to consider whether or not you're going to provide just open spaces for, if you're doing tiny houses on wheels, where you leave spaces for temporary people that come in and want to stay for a week. So that's something to think about. You may just have some open pads there that you can lease out on a nightly or minimum 3-night basis or whatever that is.
And then you're also, when you're going tiny, a lot of times people are downsizing and they're looking for a place to put their boat, their RV, something like that. And if you have extra space in your acreage that where you could do something like that, or a mini storage type thing, rather than having to go off site to rent the mini storage, that might be a consideration when people are going downsizing and they still have stuff they want to put somewhere.
Yeah, that would be a huge question for you up front in the zoning, whether or not you're going to be able to put what accessory structures you can put in your project. And that would be something you would do way, way, way up front, really early, in order to make sure that you could do that if that was an important criteria for you.
And also the consideration for tiny or micro homes, threw that in there because tiny homes, are 400 square feet or less, and micro homes, could be 600, 700, 800 square feet. So if you develop a project, I don't know what the square footage is on your homes, whether you're still calling them tiny homes, but in Appendix Q, they define tiny homes as 400 square feet or less. And the reason to build, if you do decide to go tiny, if you want to do tiny homes, a tiny house project, is that you get the opportunity to use Appendix Q and put a loft in there for sleeping and that kind of a thing. Those lofts are only designed for the 400 square foot or less. I don't know what if you put one in a regular home, how that would play out, but they do spell it out in Appendix AQ now. It's called that it's 400 square feet or less. I think your units are a little bit larger than that, though, aren't they, Scott?
We're going from 396 to 568. We're just getting ready to sit down with the architect. In fact, we're going to have a meeting with them on Friday, one of them, and we're talking about the game of the lofts, because theoretically, if you include the loft under Appendix Q, it could boost up your square footage to put you, let's say, over the 400. That would blow out your ability to use Appendix Q that has different requirements for your stairs and other things. So we may be calling it storage space and letting the people have the option to figure that out for themselves after they get the CO. As one.
Yeah, I don't know how it is in the in IRC. They say 400 square feet or less, whether the loft is included in the square footage. I know in ANSI, lofts are not included and porches are not included in your square footage. And I see Leanne's got her hand up, so she's been very patient sitting there. Go ahead. You have a question?
Andy has a question that I will ask on his behalf. He wants to know if you're going to install any EV charging stations, electric vehicle charging.
Yeah, we would definitely be installing some of those in our project. There's no question about it.
There you go.
In today's world, there's that, and then there's the possibility of solar, a solar farm or solar on the roofs, that you might want to consider. In the state of Florida, composting toilets are legal. You can use composting toilets instead of regular flushing toilets. So there's all of that new technology we heard about on Tuesday. Was it Tuesday or Monday? Monday, I think it was. We heard about a new toilet design. They're coming up with more and more things. This was a gal in Minnesota that the guys invented a toilet that because it's cold up there that uses some kind of and it's in the homeless area where they don't have water and everything running to it, water and sewer running to it. It's in a main area of the church where they're putting these. But they've invented this new kind of toilet that has some kind of a tank that doesn't freeze. It's underneath of the toilet or underneath of the home, and you only have to dump it once a month or something like that. So when I get that information, guys, I'll be happy to share it with you. She emailed me the guy's name who invented it, but there's all kinds of neat stuff like that, Andy, coming out. And but electric vehicles are a real thing today, and so I don't know whether they're required, but I think it's a good idea if you are going to be creating a sustainable subdivision for people to have those charging spots.
I would also recommend, as an add-on to what you just said, Robin, is that if you have, let's say, strings of parking, like we're going to have outside that's external to the project, we will be putting chases in to be able to expand that without having to tear up our landscaping and everything else later. So we'll be putting chases in, based on whoever's going to put in the stations for us. Most likely we'll have an idea of what would be a good expansion, if you will, capability.
Good point. Because, if people go more and more electric vehicles and less gas, then you may have half of your parking spots having to have outlets for the electric vehicles to charge.
Well, if we're looking at theoretically, I think the government's been saying that they want us to have by 2030, all the vehicles are going to be electric vehicles, at least the new ones. And you think about that, it's only a little over 7 years away. Now, whether or not they accomplish that or not, it doesn't really matter to us, but we need to be prepared for it.
Absolutely. Positively.
Good
All
question.
right. So we have two choices here. We can either use a general contractor or we can act as a general contractor. And we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
This is
typically
on the
we're
vertical.
going to. Yeah, we're going to be using a general contractor on this. I think it's very problematic to boutique out your vertical construction. The key here is to make sure that the people are insured. You can get into a big mess if especially the contractor will be, but you want to make sure that they're bringing in subcontractors that have insurance, especially workers' comp.
Yeah, but depending upon the size of your project, you may not want to do that. I know in Lake Dallas, Texas, Terry did his own. And so if you are going to act as a GC, obviously you're going to cut out the profit that would normally go to a GC to run a project, but you're going to have to make sure everybody's got workman's comp that comes onto the project. They got a general liability. You have to get all the estimates from all of the different subcontractors and put all that together. So you're going to be dealing with multiple contracts. You're going to have pay schedules. And just a word of caution: do not pay any upfront payments. No down payment. Hey, I'll do your electrical work. I just need 20% down to get started. Man, not a good idea, guys. Judging from experience. And I see your hand, David. I'll go get right to you in a second. And then you have your construction management. Definitely you want to get a release of liens every time you make a payment to a sub. Make sure you either get a partial or a final release of lien signed for that payment. Otherwise, you might end up with a mechanic's lien against your property. So yeah, go ahead, David.
I was just going to make a funny point, and you can be crazy like me and do 100% of the work yourself and not have a single subcontractor.
Good point.
A little crazy myself, but so far it's working out great.
That's really cool. Going back to the release of liens, you need, if you're paying, let's say your concrete sub, you need to make sure that he's paying the concrete company. So typically we require releases from the material supplier in addition to the labor provider. Yeah,
and what'll happen, guys, at least in our area, you'll get a notice that, because it's Florida law, you'll get a notice from the material supplier that you could be in jeopardy of getting a lien, and you'll be like freaking out because your GC, you're like thinking your GC didn't pay the guy. What's up? But that's normal. They have to, within a certain number of days, to notify the owner that they did put some material on the property, and they could potentially file a lien if they don't get paid. So that's the way it works. So make sure before you pay your GC that he's either giving you the release of liens for the materials, or you're getting them yourself, or somehow like that.
Sometimes you can do it. We've done it before, where you pay ABC contractor and the material supplier in the same check. That means somebody's got to endorse it and give it to the other one.
Good point. And then I just wanted to kind of run through, here, when you are your own GC, you got to deal with a masonry contractor, a concrete, a plumbing, electrical, mechanical, framing, siding and stucco, sometimes exterior trim and gutters, your roofing, your paint, trim and cabinets, your flooring, your sod and landscaping, and your sprinkler. And that's not even all of them. I just made a list off the top of my head. But all of these guys go into just the vertical construction, unless you're a David Rotter and you're going to do everything yourself. But anyway, and then you want to talk a little bit about this slide here as we kind of wrap things up? Scott?
Sure. So draws are incremental payments that you'll make. So as you complete various stages of your vertical construction, you'll have a payment from your lender, assuming that you're using a lender. And then they'll have bank inspectors that'll come out, or in terms of, let's say, the horizontal, we typically have the civil engineer will have somebody on staff possibly, or we'll hire an outside company to come in and do the inspections. You need to have that pretty well arranged so that you're not waiting 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever for an inspector to come out to say that you can do this. Retainers are okay in certain instances. Also, the other thing that's not here is that you can go ahead and, in some instances, buy the product. Like if you look at D.R. Horton buys train loads full of drywall and train loads full of this, that, and the other thing, so that they know that they have the materials on site. The other thing you need to think about is if you're doing 20 units or something, you need to think about when you're going to need the item, let's say a window. So some of the stuff in Florida right now, we've been 6-8 months out on trusses and windows, for example. So you're doing your infrastructure and you're ordering your windows. And in many cases, you're going to have to put a retainer down on those items. So in that case, you're dealing straight with the manufacturer or the material provider. Sometimes your contractor is going to have that too, where he's going to go to PG Windows or whatever. And so, he's going to tell you that PG is requiring, 25% deposit or whatever on your, 48 windows that you're buying or whatever. So,
yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about when I was thinking about retainers there, Scott, I know the AIA, American Institute of Architects, they usually keep 10%. You have a draw schedule, 20% when this happens, and then 20% when the next thing happens. And there's like a draw schedule that you would get either when you're paying your general contractor or when the bank is paying the general contractor. But the AIA contract has a 10% retainer in there that you don't get all your 20%. You get all but 10. And that retainer kind of stays in an escrow account somewhere until you finally get through the end of the project or whatever you're doing. Have you seen any of that happening?
Yeah, that's very, very typical. The reason being, it's kind of like paying the bank. If you're doing, let's say, 50 lots and you're going to have a higher release price than what they call 1-to-1. So let's say your finished lot value is 40 grand, for example. You may have to pay 50,000 to release that lot. So that what happens is by the time that the bank releases, you release 80% of the lots the bank's paid off. So that's why we always consider that our profit as a land developer, if I was just purely developing, let's say, 50 lots and selling them to Robin, who was going to put the units on it, we would always consider that our profit, the 20% we're going to make, is at the end of the project. We make it,
and that's a good point, guys. If you're relying on sales, or you're wanting to do sales prior to paying off the loan, you would need to have an agreement with whoever has that loan that they would release a lot for X amount of dollars, so that you could, in fact, sell that house. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to sell anything until the whole project was finished, or at least 80% of it in the bank paid off or whatever.
Yeah, and performance bonds typically are done on infrastructure, depending on the size of your infrastructure. That your site contractor, if you have a single site contractor, he'll usually be able to provide the performance bond. That means that the city or the county or whatever is assured that the project, the infrastructure, can be completed.
Yeah, and even in Colorado, when they're building tiny houses, the manufacturers are required to put up a performance bond. And it's basically, you take somebody's deposit and they want you to be sure that you're going to perform. So you buy a bond rather than putting the money up in escrow, and then you can use that money. But that's a performance bond. Basically, from what I've heard, if you need a $15,000 performance bond, it's going to cost you $1,500. to get, and that's just in case something happens, you don't deliver, that they can dip into that performance bond and make the either the buyer or the other person a little wholer than they would have been if you filed bankruptcy or did something like that. And then a construction to perm loan, basically, if you're going to keep the project, sometimes there will be a construction loan, which might be a little bit higher interest loan. But once the project is completed, if you have a construction to perm, it automatically goes into a permanent loan with a long-term loan with an interest, usually a 30-year mortgage on it. But you can't get a permanent loan on something until after it's completed. So they have what they call a construction to perm. So you're not finishing the construction. You got this construction loan. You're trying to find a bank or a lender that's willing to lend on it. You already have it laid out, set out, and ready to go.
The other time we use construction to perm loans is that, let's say I have my 22 lots and I want to generate faster cash flow. I go ahead and sell lot number 1 to Mr. Butler, and then he goes ahead and he signs a construction loan with ABC Bank. So what happens in the first draw, I get my infrastructure and my lot money out, and then we're building the house and then delivering it to Mr. Butler when it's completed. But the loan is actually in Robin's name rather than in our name, the actual vertical loan.
That's a good point, guys. He could sell all 22 lots before he started, and everybody that bought the lots could get construction to perm loans, and he would have all of his money to go do the work.
You would typically set that up with most likely a community bank in your area that wants to do, provide affordable housing or attainable housing or workforce housing to their constituents, and they'll go ahead and do that construction to perms. What's nice is the people qualifying it gets off your credit and it's not part of your credit structure.
Good point. That's we should have brought that up earlier, but that's what happens with this project. We think of things along the way that are important. There's so much. It's so it's not that hard, but it is complicated. It's got a lot of moving parts to it. I heard it was like let's say you get these jigsaw puzzles, that you had to do. Well, I heard that one guy used to do that every holiday, and then his wife thought he was getting it too easy, so decided that she would put all the jigsaw puzzles in a bag without the picture, and he had to put it together without that picture. Well, that's what you're doing, when you're trying to do this project without something that we've been doing for the last several weeks here. You don't have a picture of what the whole thing looks like. You're trying to piece this in and you're missing that piece, and it's hard to do. But if you've got a picture and there's a lot of pieces, but if you've got a picture to go by, it makes it a whole lot easier to make it happen. And then if you want to really get your family mad at you, give them the pieces in the bag, but also throw in a few pieces from some other jigsaw puzzles, and they will really be pulling their hair out.
My development business card has jigsaw puzzle pieces on it, but I look at it a little differently. I think it's a process, and to me, the whole thing is just purely process. So when I do a jigsaw puzzle, I find the 4 corner pieces, assuming it's a rectangular or square or whatever, and then you do the edge pieces, and then you go in there, and then there's the red barn and the yellow flowers. So you get most of the red barn done, and you're starting to work on the yellow flowers, and you put this piece in, and it goes right in, and it doesn't fit. And then 5 minutes later, put that same piece in that same spot, and it still doesn't fit. So then you put that piece over to the left side, out of the way from all the other pieces. And invariably, you're going to put that piece in there 4 or 5 more times or 10 more times. And then when you're toward the end of the puzzle, you'll find some stupid piece that doesn't have any yellow in it. It doesn't look like it should even fit in there. And it's the piece that goes in there. And if you do it all right, you're going to come out with a completed picture, and you're going to be really proud of yourself because you have this beautiful picture of this sky, the blue sky, and the red barn and the yellow flowers, which is your tiny house community. To me, it's really exciting, but it's all process. And if you can think of it just being process, then you'll be way ahead of the game.
Absolutely. That's absolutely great advice, Scott. So last slide here, I'm just going to read it. These are, sometimes you'll get your permits and you'll have all of these inspections, 17 inspections or 20 inspections that you need to have on it. And it'll be things like footings or first rough or slab, the down cells on your block inspected, your framing, your rough electric, plumbing, and mechanical insulation. You might have a blower door test or a plumbing mechanical final, and you have an electric with power release. That's before they're going to turn the power on. And then after they turn the power on, they can do another final electrical to make sure everything works and test your GFCIs and things. And then they do your final structural on that. At that point, you get your CO. But that's it, guys. We're a little over time today. I apologize for doing that, but we kind of needed to run through this today as we're trying to wrap things up here. Any final words, Scott, before we close us out today?
No, again, I just appreciate you all tuning in, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions or talk with you outside of this venue if you want to get a hold of me.
You want to, what's your email? And Leanne can put it in the chat.
Put it in there.
Yep. It's
I think I know it.
sbanta@dqtn.org.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, it's been real. And I'm going to turn it back over to Leanne and let her go ahead and bring us out. If we don't have any questions, kind of wrap us up, and we'll say good night, good morning, or good evening, depending to everyone.
That was sbanta@dqtn.org, right?
Yeah, DreamQuestTinyNeighborhoods.org.
I got it. Ow. Just hit my hand. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Robin and Scott, for all of this great info. It's quite an education. And tomorrow night we have our inspector Q&A. If you guys want to tune in, if you have anything special you want to ask about, or just tune in to listen and learn. The guys have had some really good discussions so far, so hope you can be with us. And we thank you guys for joining us. Enjoy your evening. David, don't work too hard. I see Andy left the building, so I was going to tell him the same thing. But you guys have a great evening. Thanks for tuning in. See you later.
Bye, all.